Yeah.
Now the real thing is, can I change them? Can I make the change? That would be like the biggest part in that. But definitely tracking my food would be like very good
Mm-hmm.
for me.
So post meet, what is the one food that you want to eat?
Uh,
Or does it like fluctuate? Does it different?
it fluctuates. But I know like last year throughout all of indoor, after every meet, I'll be driving to Chick-fil-A and I'll ask them, can I get them chicken nuggets
Mm-hmm.
and a chicken sandwich?
That sounds pretty good. That's a good pre-meet food. Post meet. There you go.
And I won't even get to like the house. I would just devour it in the car. Like,
I love
I'll
that.
just be starving. I'm just like, okay, I need this now.
Okay, so nutrition, it's not bad. We're working on it. We're gonna add some vegetables into the plan, maybe. But how's your sleep? Are you
Uh,
getting at least 8.5 hours every night, or what do you think?
I would say for sleep, it fluctuates depending upon how school is going. As sometimes there might be homework in which I just have to stay up past where I want to in order to get it done. I definitely have to put education above athletics, and so I definitely, I would say it definitely fluctuates. Sometimes it could be 8 hours, sometimes it could be six. It just really depends upon how school is going, what do I have for that day.
I love that you said you're a student over an athlete. I don't know how many people say that. But I know you're a gamer, Garrett. Does that ever keep you up late
On the weekends, most certainly,
on the weekends? What kind of games are you playing?
Call of Duty, Apex, Fortnite, a
Oh
lot of
my.
mainstream. Dude, I know people listening to this have seen the new Spider-Man,
Harrison,
bro.
have you seen it?
Game or movie?
The game.
Okay, no, I'm actually I'm on the outside looking in.
You just disappointed Garrett. Garrett's not happy anymore.
Listen. Spider-Man 2, that's like one of the greatest games that's ever came out this year.
I can believe that. I know those. I've never played any of them, but I hear those are awesome to play.
I'd be sitting up to like 2 a.m.
I feel like this isn't an only weekend thing. I feel like this is an everyday kind of
No,
thing.
this is not every day. This is not every day. I actually barely play any console games on the weekends. I'll only just like play around with like the mobile games on my phone. But on the weekends, that's where I can like just let go and relax. Specifically on Sundays. As you know, Saturday we have practice and Friday we have to prepare for Saturday practice.
So Sundays, nobody texts Garrett, nobody call Garrett. He's playing games. It's his relaxation day.
Facts.
Exactly. So that's your relaxing during the weekend. How do you relax and get your body just to chill out during the weekdays?
I would just say probably just lying down as one of my favorite things to do. Just lie down and chill. Don't really have to do much. Hopefully all work is done. And yeah, I'll just say mostly just lying down. Maybe it might turn to a nap.
Jake Buckman with you here on 93.7 The Ticket, along with Austin Owerman, as we are here and ready for another Hoops postgame breakdown. Unfortunately, it's not going to be a fun one for Nebraska fans. Looked like it could be a good one through the first half, as Nebraska had a pretty good lead going throughout a big majority of the night and end up losing this one. There's a lot to break down. Of course, it's only the first conference game for Nebraska, but they failed to start 1-0 for in-conference play once again. This time to the worst team in the league last year, who went 2-19 in Minnesota and who were without their leading scorer for a majority of this game. So lots to break down here. Austin, we'll go ahead and welcome you in and kind of get your initial thoughts on what is a very disappointing night in Husker men's hoops.
That is an understatement. Bach, super understatement. This is a game that wasn't supposed to happen to this team. Nebraska kind of slugged through the first 12 minutes or so. You get to the U8 timeout in the first half, and Nebraska goes on a big run. Feels like Nebraska's in control, getting basically everything they want on the offensive end, rebounding pretty well on the defensive end. And then it all falls apart at halftime. I mean, you can see the cracks starting to show at the end of the first half with Minnesota getting that last bucket the way they did, but no energy for Nebraska out of the break. And to me, the story of the game is Dawson Garcia's ankle injury, not being able to play. And I think that benefited Minnesota. When he was in there, you could tell they were looking for him as a stretch big, trying to get him the ball early on. And Rink Mast and Josiah Alec, I think, are good matchups for Nebraska on Dawson Garcia. When he went out, Minnesota had to rely on its guards to, get downhill. But then Ola Joseph took over and Pharrell Payne took over. Those are guys that have given Nebraska problems in the past because they are insanely athletic. They can jump out of the gym and they're chiseled, right? Like PJ Flex probably asked 4 or 5 times if they can play tight end or defensive end. Those are legit athletes, and Nebraska couldn't contain them on offense. Breakdowns in ball coverage, not tagging the roller in that 2-man action sort of pick and roll. But really, Bach, the story of the last 12 minutes of this game for Nebraska came down to those 2 guys remembering they were the best athletes on the court and showing it. Nebraska had no answer for the size and the physical play, coupled with the effort that Minnesota showed. They got on that run, and Nebraska wasn't able to stem it, which goes back to what I've been saying. Nebraska getting up by 15, 17 points at the end of the first half, a veteran team like this should be able to essentially play the second half on cruise control. Somehow Nebraska wasn't able to, so they needed that emotional spark. Credit Minnesota for doing a good job on Keisei Tominaga all night, making his life difficult. Nebraska's got to find ways to get him involved. Bryce Williams only had 1 point in the second half. I wouldn't say he's an emotional leader, but you still see Nebraska searching for that size on the interior and then that spark emotionally when other teams do go on runs. Either Nebraska has to be better on defense and not allow runs like that to happen, or if they're going to, have those emotional swings in games, they have to find ways to go on runs of their own, like they did over the last, 8 minutes of the first half, like they did to Oregon State, but they just haven't been able to find that spark these last couple games.
Yeah, it's interesting how you kind of look at that, and especially the Garcia injury actually playing into Minnesota's hands. It certainly took them a while to kind of make that adjustment, as you said, and so I think part of this too, and certainly will be a conversation after this loss. It's just bound to come back up. Is if you have too many more of these, then you kind of start to wonder about the future of the program. Do you believe Fred Hoiberg got out coached tonight?
I think that's one way to look at it, and I think you can look at it a couple different ways, right? Minnesota found something at halftime. Nebraska didn't, right? Nebraska wasn't able to run a play or find something that worked in the second half, and absolutely some of that falls back on Fred Hoiberg. I would say the other way that it could potentially reflect on the head coach is in the scheduling, right? Maybe we overrated Nebraska. I think the Duquesne win was a good win that will hold up. That's a really solid team. But Nebraska got away with playing a subpar first half. The reason I don't fully put this one on Fred Hoiberg or the scheduling or rotations or anything is because Nebraska was just carelessly sloppy with the ball. They averaged fewer than 10 turnovers per game coming in. Tonight, Bach, they have 18. Now, Minnesota tried to give quite a few of those back. Minnesota had 16 turnovers, so definitely not a clean game. But Nebraska gave up 24 points off of their 18 turnovers. Lots of Minnesota's turnovers, and I think the broadcast noted this, were dead ball turnovers where they had a chance to set their defense and force Nebraska to run action. Whereas, especially in that run that Minnesota made to not just get back in the game, but take the lead and push it to 8 to 10 points, live ball turnovers with that alley-oop forcing that timeout from Fred Hoiberg on just a careless play, right? And again, those careless turnovers, those lack of focus turnovers, even for just a split second, Minnesota was opportunistic, and a team that's played as much basketball as Nebraska has collectively, if not together, shouldn't be prone to lapses to the tune of 18 careless turnovers.
Yeah, it was like you said, kind of an ugly game, sloppy game. Minnesota came in leading the conference in turnovers, average about 14 a game. They had 16, and some of it you could see. It's like, okay, they've got some guys here and there, but they're a little sloppy, and that's probably going to hold them back. But like you said, Nebraska matching the slop tonight, and even surpassing it in the tune of 2 more turnovers than Minnesota. But again, kind of we'll have a lot of time to kind of break this down. But big picture discussion, I guess for those that are not ready to hit the panic meter. I see Byron in the tech and on YouTube chat say time to hit the panic button. That was downright embarrassing effort without their best player. is, again, just the context in all of this is that Minnesota was 2-19 last year in the Big Ten. They did beat you. They finished Nebraska's season in Big Ten play last year, but that was with Dawson Garcia getting 18-13, and he's by far their best player. He goes out early in this game. You have a 14-point lead at half, and then just a collapse and a disaster from there. And it was a half that it kind of reminds me of the Michigan State game last year, where it's like the first half was like, man, this might be the best half we've seen this team play all year. Nebraska, there was ways to look at that first half. I was thinking of all the storylines we're going to talk about, which is Nebraska shot 2 of 22 against Creighton from 3. The first half, they don't focus on that. They only took 6 3-point attempts in the first half, made 3 of them. But a lot of it was getting points inside. The first 10 points came inside. So it's like, okay, maybe they're learning how to play without a 3-point shot falling for them. The cutting, the bench scoring from CJ Wilcher. The fact that Tamanaga hadn't scored and they were still up 14 points. It was like, okay, maybe, that's not great in Tamanaga's case, but for Nebraska's case, it's showing them grow as a team. And so there was just it's a bit of a roller coaster. So it's just such a positive and feel like it's a good first step. And for what it's worth, Nebraska hasn't won their first conference game, I think, since the 2018-2019 season. So it would have been a little bit refreshing. We know about the difficult schedule coming up. I mean, so it was just this feel-good moment at half. And you're just thinking, like you said, just cruise from here. And then all those factors that are factoring in just feels like a swift kick to the gut and right back to where you are as a Nebraska basketball fan, maybe where you feel like you belong after so many years of this. It's hard to take.
Meet new Nebraska, same as the old Nebraska, is really what it comes down to. I'm glad you brought up that Michigan State game, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about Michigan State later tonight and then throughout the week, because that's Nebraska's next opponent. It was different though, right? Minnesota hit some threes in the second half. Not a great shooting night for them. 5 of 11 from 3 in the second half. Obviously plenty to get the job done after they were 3 of 14 in the first half. But again, it was the offensive rebounds, right? Nebraska didn't have an answer. They kept trying to box out one-on-one instead of getting a second body. Minnesota wasn't crashing all 5 guys and saying, we're going to throw everything at the offensive glass. If you beat us in transition, beat us in transition. It was 1 or 2 guys, right? Nebraska standing around with less energy, not getting a body, not pursuing the basketball the same way that Minnesota was. And that led to some of those second chance points for Minnesota, those second opportunities in just some ridiculous circumstances, right? Payne had a couple really nice finishes. Ola Joseph went beast mode a couple of times as well. That if Nebraska gets the body first, Minnesota doesn't get that feel-good boost, right? They don't have a guy going 1-on-3 with, just his pivot foot, essentially, is all that Ola Joseph used on a couple of those moves. It wasn't fancy. It was Big Ten West football on a basketball court, and Minnesota looked so much better equipped to play it tonight than Nebraska did.
Yeah, it wasn't anything as particularly spectacular from Minnesota, but it was also just, that want factor too, and just the game of momentum. And that's why I kind of asked you about the coaching tonight, is because Ben Johnson, I would love to be a fly in the wall for what he said at halftime to get him going, or where they kind of got that boost of energy. And it just by the end of the game, Minnesota had the momentum. And then they were getting the effort plays. They were getting the big time rebounds when you need them. Nebraska ultimately didn't get out rebounded by too much. In fact, won the rebounding battle.
It was 32-32.
Yeah, tied up. But it felt like Minnesota was getting everyone down the stretch. Then I think the other story of this game is going from, again, a feeling that Bryce Williams may be, looks like Jaylen Brown out there in the first half. And then by the second half, looks like, I suppose, finals Jaylen Brown that couldn't go left. But it wasn't that particular problem. But they figured out how to defend him. They figured out how to frustrate him. He tried to, maybe feel like it was his night and tried to go a takeover. I think he did that a bit in the first half and was able to get it further worked in his favor, where he missed 2 shots and still ended scoring on those possessions. And so it just kind of felt like his night. And in the second half, they rattled him so much that he's grabbing people's legs when he's on the ground. And so getting a tech for that. It was grabbing the guards, the Minnesota guards' foot on the tech that the Minnesota player ended up getting. But ultimately fouling out, and a lot of it just kind of over aggression, getting close, getting somewhat pretty good looks at the hoop, but just not converting him in the second half. He ended up with I think 17 points at halftime and 18 overall.
Yeah, and he split his pair of free throws pretty early in the second half. So Bryce Williams went a good chunk of the second half without scoring. Now, granted, he was on the bench with foul trouble for some of that. But again, that's self-inflicted. I didn't think it was the cleanest game, right? I think there was one after that technical. Nebraska should have got the ball back. Clearly off of Minnesota. Two guys were between Bryce Williams and the sideline. Mitchell clearly ripped it out of his hands, and it goes Minnesota's way. But Nebraska didn't deserve that call, right? Nebraska didn't earn that call, right? Williams kind of stuck the ball out in front of it. Like, what's the guy supposed to do? Let you have it? No. Nebraska didn't get the same looks for Bryce Williams. The energy wasn't there to get him open. He missed some of the tough ones that he had available, and he got himself in foul trouble with that grab for the fourth, burying the shoulder into the Minnesota guy's chest to try to force it for the fifth. But the one that stands out to me is near the end of the first half, or maybe the start of the second half. He jumps to contest that shot. He's played good defense on Cam Christie, but instead of just going straight up, he tries to block the shot. You're not going to get it. Cam Christie has a high release point, pretty good athlete that knows how to, get a shot off. You can respect the effort, but sometimes it's about trying easier, right? Not trying less, but trying easier. Bryce Williams did his job, forced that one. Then Nebraska was kind of in panic mode by the time he gets his fifth foul, just searching for an answer. And that, to me, Bach, is what kind of blows my mind about this team on the offensive end, is there's no one guy that on his own can go get you a bucket. Maybe Casey, potentially Rink Mass sometimes in the post, Bryce Williams here and there, but there's no like Bryce McGowan's that can get a shot from anywhere on the court. No Alonzo Verge with a first step. No Teddy Allen that can do things in a variety of ways, right? Nebraska needs to work as a team. And you would think that, again, a veteran team that shared the ball so well through the first 7 games would understand to rely on each other when the going gets tough. But when they do rely on each other, they do move the ball and there is good action. Someone misses a shot, typically, that would, stop the bleeding. Or Nebraska just completely abandons the Fred Hoiberg style of basketball, the motion, the movement, and everything, and goes and plays one-on-one. Nebraska's not good enough to do that.
Yeah, I mean, and I noticed that in the Creighton game too, where there's, guys are trying to step up and be that one that kind of stops the drought, gets Nebraska going once again. And it happened again tonight. Jamarcus Lawrence eventually kind of got into that mode. I don't think with the way he's been shooting thus far this season that's necessarily where you want to go. But he did get like a step up 3 and then a 2 there after that. He finished with 16 points. So that's
But he had 7 turnovers, right? It's good to see him get going, scoring the ball. I mean, 3 of 5 from 3, I think matches the number of 3-pointers he's made all year. Hit a nice little step back jumper from the left wing at one point. But your point guard can't have 7 turnovers. Bryce Williams had 4 as well. I mean, of your 18 turnovers, 11 of them come from your lead ball handlers. That's unacceptable, regardless of the level of play. I don't care if you just picked up a basketball in second grade. You can't have 11 turnovers from your 2 primary ball handlers against a Minnesota team that wasn't pressing, wasn't doing anything special. They just took advantage of carelessness.
Yeah, and those 2 players, like you said, led the team in turnovers, also led the team in points. So at some point in time, it was kind of like a try hard type of thing. But yeah, too many turnovers from Nebraska tonight. Lots to kind of break down here with Tamanaga not scoring. We'll get into that. The bigs, the lack of bigs, I suppose, on defense you already touched on, but how big of a concern is that in the future? We'll break on down all that stuff. We've got to take a quick break. We'll be right back here on the Hoops Postgame Show. Once again, Nebraska drops their conference opener to Minnesota 76-65. They fall to 7-2 overall and 0-1 in conference play. We'll be right back to talk more Husker Hoops here on 93.7 The Ticket.
Action Plumbing, Heating, Air, and Electric brings exciting career opportunities for you or someone you know. They are now hiring plumbers, electricians, and HVAC techs and installers to continually build their professional team. They offer competitive pay and full benefits packages that include health, dental, vision, PTO, and 401k options. Action has created a positive team environment for over 50 years. Apply online at actionlincoln.com.
Wall-to-Wall Wine and Spirits is now open in Lincoln. Shop our expansive collection of wine, beer, spirits, and cigars at 5040 North 27th Street. From top shelf liquor to crowd favorite beer, Wall to Wall Wine and Spirits has a beverage for every taste and every budget. Plus, join our loyalty program to earn rewards and save on future purchases. Shop Wall to Wall Wine and Spirits at 5040 North 27th Street in Lincoln. That's 5040 North 27th Street.
This is James Harrell with NP Dodge Real Estate. When I became a licensed realtor, I wanted a brokerage that would help me grow in my new career. I found that in Lincoln First Realty. When Lincoln First was acquired by NP Dodge, the training and support I received only got better. I love knowing I have the power of the NP Dodge brand behind me. I would recommend NP Dodge to new agents looking to jumpstart their real estate career and to current agents who want to take their business to the next level.
Expand your career with NP Dodge. Call Eric at 402-434-2222.
This is where it happens. Long hikes with friends, kayaking adventures with family, more horseback riding, zipline gliding, rock face climbing, hammock camping fun than you could ever imagine. And it's all outdoors, amongst the trees and across the prairie, here beneath Nebraska skies. Plan an outing today at yournebraskaadventure.com. Sponsored by Nebraska Game and Parks, aired with the Nebraska Broadcasters Association and this station.
Back here with you on the Hoops post-game show. Nebraska dropping their conference opener to Minnesota 76-65. This with Minnesota being without their leading scorer, Darson Garcia, for the majority of the game, who ended up with 0 points because he rolled over his foot early in that game. And then Minnesota, who only averaged 2 guys in double figures all year long, Garcia being one of them, ended up with 5 guys in double figures, and Christie right there with 9 points as well. So it's kind of a spread out attack from a Minnesota team that, again, has some pieces there, has some athleticism there, but not necessarily what we're believing to be one of the top teams in the Big Ten, which is why it's particularly difficult for Nebraska to lose this game. We'll get to some of your reaction. You can text us on the Start Aim text line, 402-464-5685. Of course, we are on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. We can get to your comments that way as well, and we will here in just a bit. But Austin, I wanted to start by asking you, what's with Keisei Tamanaga tonight? Was he just really well guarded by Minnesota? Obviously didn't take too many shots. Kind of started putting some up there toward the end, but held to just 4 points, all from the free throw line, 0 of 5 from the floor.
Yeah, I think it's something that Nebraska is going to have to figure out. It wasn't just tonight, right? He got some buckets against Creighton, but they were all tough. Keisei hasn't had a lot of easy looks this season. He got a lot of easy looks last year. As a good job cutting without the ball, got some spot up looks as well, but there's a scouting report on him, right? Minnesota did some different things. I did a lot of face guarding. Carrington, I think his name was for them. Carrington, 13 points, but his best efforts came on the defensive end, right? We're seeing the limitations that Keisei Tamanaga has in the system Nebraska wants to run. I don't want to say he was a flash in the pan last year necessarily, or just like a one-hit wonder, end of the season wonder kind of thing. I think he's more talented than that. But Nebraska's got to find ways to get him better shots. How do you do that? Either get the ball in his hands more, let him run pick and roll. That's what Strick has said Nebraska can do, that he has some of that off the bounce juice. He can create separation for the jumper, start the pick and roll a little higher on the court too, so he can dribble into a 3-pointer instead of running it so tight where it's a long 2 or there's length in their size around a smaller guard. Or what has to happen is if Nebraska wants to continue running its same actions, then screens have to be better, right? They have to be set up better, whether that's Keisei, CJ Wilcher, whoever it is, Bryce Williams coming off a screen, set their man up a little more. It's communicating and being on the same page with whoever the screener is for the correct angle of the screen, where it is you're looking to catch the ball, how it is you're looking to catch the ball, and what you're planning to do with it after that. So there are ways for Nebraska to get Keisei Tamanaga going, but I don't expect him to be Nebraska's leading scorer the rest of the way. I think this is going to be set up more for Bryce Williams to be that guy. I think Keisei is going to find himself relegated to kind of being a Thorbjarnarson role. And I don't think that's where he's best, right? Thor was a little bigger, gave you some benefits defensively and rebounding. Casey competes, right? He does with defense and rebounding. He's just not that big. Tonight, as much as Minnesota was face guarding him, throwing Nebraska out of rhythm, and Nebraska wasn't able to get him shots, I would have liked to have seen maybe some more CJ Wilcher, maybe Sam Hoiberg, guys like that you're not necessarily running plays for, but are proven floor spacers that Minnesota has to guard traditionally that lets you run the actions that you want the way that you want to run them. Again, Casey is a good player. There are ways for Nebraska to get him going, but that's maybe one adjustment Fred Hoiberg could have made, was to make that tough call to sit one of your best offensive players unless you had the chance to go offense defense. You had the ball coming out of a timeout to get him a look, because you just didn't get a lot from Keisei Tominaga. And I think CJ Wilcher's, a little bit bulkier size. Sam Hoiberg's, defense at the point of attack, even if it's just for a spurt for Sam Hoiberg, I think that could have been helpful for Nebraska to maybe stem that big Minnesota run.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It would have been a tough call to make. Obviously, Casey is always 1 or 2 shots away from hitting 3 or 4 in a row. So you're always kind of playing that game. But I thought it was well defended. And again, also, like you're saying, it's kind of getting to a point to where Casey at last year could be effective without his shot for the night, and just wasn't tonight.
All season, really. I mean, he's not shooting the same way. It's been difficult for Nebraska to get him any shots. And I think that that's a function of him being a little higher on the scouting report. Last year, you started with Griesel and Walker, even with Tominaga really coming on strong, but he was option 3 on the scouting report. And, he's still shooting 38% from 3 this year. It just doesn't feel like it, right? It doesn't feel like it has the same impact, especially this last handful of games, right? Casey was really that emotional heart and soul of that team. He would spark the team to runs, hit some absolutely ridiculous ones. The Casey heat checks were so fun, got Pinnacle Bank Arena going, kept Nebraska in games on the road. We just haven't had that moment from him yet. And I think that's both a function of him being higher on the other team's scouting reports, but also how Nebraska is using him and the rest of the roster around him.
Yeah, his chemistry with Derek Walker was something special by the end of the year. Obviously, don't have that working for them either. You did mention CJ Wilcher. I think he would have been a good option tonight. I think he's one of the bright spots. Obviously, his cutting and then kind of got him going a little bit. He was able to hit a couple jumpers, one from about the free throw line and then one from the top of the arc. What do you think about CJ's play? The only, I guess, the negative is it's this kind of the same thing with Bryce Williams. This was all in the first half. And then just, didn't get anything. In fact, for him, didn't get anything in the second half.
Right. Again, it comes down to consistency for everyone, right? CJ Wilcher is not a guy that has a lot of creation in him, right? He relies on a lot of other guys to set him up, and he's good down the scatter report. CJ Wilcher did in that first half pretty much exactly what I think his role is for this team. He's a great glue guy that ties a lot of different lineups together because he's a good enough ball handler, good enough free throw shooter, good enough three-point shooter, acceptable on defense, okay positional rebounder. CJ Wilcher is a great role guy. If you have to rely on him to win a game, it's kind of like other teams just forgot to close out on him, or, they just forgot about him backdoor. CJ Wilcher is a good, solid player that I think can raise Nebraska's floor. But if you need him to, raise Nebraska's ceiling, I think you're kind of grasping at straws at this point. He is what he is, at least in my opinion, that connective piece. And that's fine. He's carved out a good role for himself at the college level. And I think Fred Hoiberg trusts him. So I wouldn't be shocked to see CJ Wilcher maybe get a little bit more time moving forward.
Yeah, well, we point to the good. We can also kind of point to the bad. And Reek Moss has been a guy that has been really good for Nebraska all year round. Tonight's a little bit troublesome, not just for this evening, but kind of looking forward in the Big Ten to where there had been a concern coming into the season that, yes, Nebraska has size, but do they have the athleticism kind of from that position? Alec, I similar to Wilcher in a different way to me, kind of is what he is. You're going to get that kind of big energy that he brings to the table, but sometimes not always contained. And so that's that piece. And he had a fine night, I suppose, for himself, 3 points and 3 rebounds. He's had better and didn't play particularly well against some of those bigs, but especially for Rink Mass today, just 4 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists. And nothing as far as like the turnover or anything particularly bothersome. He missed 2 3-pointers. You can expect that from him from time to time. But in a game that was ultimately Nebraska started to lose it with some of the rebounds down the stretch and some of the big men play down low. And in Minnesota hit their threes in the second half, so it's not all on Rick Moss. I'm just highlighting this was not pretty if you're looking forward to the Big Ten Bigs, the land of giants, kind of the first test of that for Rick Moss.
Right. And I wasn't worried about how Mast and Alec would handle Big Ten bigs. Maybe I should be, right? Because Kalkbrenner kind of dominated that game and made Alec really do some soul searching, look inside himself like he didn't know what to do. And that's a really experienced college basketball player there. I still think against the majority of bigs, Nebraska will be fine. Again, I go back to Ola Joseph and Payne are elite athletes. The Rink Mast isn't, so he has to be perfect with his positioning. He has to get in position, that one beat earlier, hit them maybe one beat earlier as the shot's going up, out of the hand instead of as it's in the air, right? Find the guy a bit sooner, rotate a step quicker. I still think there's value in Rink Mast. He's got to get those looks where his feet are set. And I also think we underrated to some degree just how good a finisher Derek Walker was. He had some wild misses at times last year when Nebraska was relying on him down the stretch. But I think back to what he did to Kalkbrenner and Edey, even Julian Reese of Maryland. Derek Walker was crafty around the rim. He found different angles. And maybe he was even tougher than I gave him credit for. He was always not always, right? He got out of control sometimes, like every player does. But for the most part, Derek Walker in attack mode went in with a plan. I think Mast has a deeper kind of bag than Walker does, but I think Walker had more angles. He was better at finishing through contact. We haven't seen more than, 3 or 4 and ones from Nebraska big men this year with similar opportunities to what Derek Walker got last year. I don't know if that's Walker's, bag of tricks was better natural touch or what it is, but Rink Mast and Josiah Alec, not only do they have to rebound better on the defensive end, they have to finish at the rim on offense. It's not all Nebraska's guards as a lack of finishing at the rim. If these big men convert some more of these opportunities, that's an extra 6-8 points per game for Nebraska, whether it is on the layup itself or bonus points at the free throw line.
And it's worth mentioning too, Juwan Gary tonight, 11 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, 5 of 7 from the field. So he had another good night. Not much to complain about there. I thought he played pretty well. His defense at time, not quite up to par with, I think, to what he's probably built and deserves as a reputation. So I guess you would maybe kind of question that a little bit.
It's up in his head, I think, because Juwan Gary, when he's engaged, when he's focused on what his assignment is, can be Nebraska's best on-ball defender. He can lock a guy down if he's engaged. But it happened against Creighton. It happened tonight. He either got caught ball watching a couple times or just fell asleep, not sticking with his man or sticking with his man too much instead of being in help position. Nebraska needs Juwan Gary to walk that fine line of, aggression and recklessness, because he brings that different sort of mentality that I don't think a lot of guys have, especially in rebounding and on defense. But he's got to play like that all the time. It can't come and go, and it especially can't go when Nebraska's in the middle of, giving up a 15-point halftime lead. That's where Nebraska needed that Juwan Gary hustle and energy. They needed him in the game to just change up the tempo. He has it in him, but we've got to see it for a full minute's allotment out of him.
Yeah, it's in just kind of reading through the comments section over here. Brandon Smith pointing out, how did we give up 52 points in the second half? I mean, obviously, you could do the simple math there. That'd be on pace for 100 plus in the game. 18 turnovers total for Nebraska. But that's how bad that second half got away from them. Obviously, they were up 14. They ended up getting doubled up, 52-26 in the second half. Boy, is that going to be tough. Tough meeting, tough drive home, and probably a little some tough words being shared on radio stations like this across Nebraska in the next day to come. Obviously, Nebraska, has Michigan State coming up, Kansas State coming up. This was supposed to be, of the 4-game stretch, the most gettable. It was on the road, but I don't think you could favor Nebraska at this point. I guess what is at this point in the season, it's very interesting because tonight was kind of your make or break. How do you respond to Creighton? And again, it went from first half, this is great, to how did that just happen? What was that second half of basketball that we watched? As you see this team where they are now, obviously the 7-0 started seeing people put them in the top 36. You started seeing NCAA tournament seeding with Nebraska next to their name. I thought that was a little bit too in front. Now it looks very much like it was. Where do you see this team? Because I'll just say it this way. And again, I don't want to start the Hoiberg talk because it's way too early for that in conference season. But just the straight facts of it is you probably can't afford 2 or 3 more of these throughout the season. You just started with a stinker, one right away in Big Ten play. So, I mean, again, this is a team that was 500 last year. It's different makeup. They finally, in my mind, have something that's kind of sustainable that they could build on from year to year with this roster. And my Nebraska basketball worriness meter is getting up, because I know if there's 2 or 3 more of these type of nights, then there's going to have to be some discussions.
I was never NCAA tournament or bust with this team, and I don't think that is. Here's the thing: we should have been in that conversation by now, but I'm willing to give Fred Hoiberg a little credit for the identity shift he made after year 3, going into last year, which was year 4. This being year 5 for him. But the worry I have, Bach, with this team, I know it's not a Duke basketball post-game show, but there are so many teams that know what they are. What can you say Nebraska does well? What can you say Nebraska has to lean on? You thought it would be, you have 2 experienced big men that will rebound, will patrol the interior, that give guys on opposing teams different looks. Maybe it's not that. You thought, okay, maybe it's the guard play for Nebraska that sets them apart. They have a lot of options. Well, Keisei Tominaga isn't getting the same shots he was last year. It's not looking as easy. Jamarcus Lawrence adapting to a new role, had his best scoring game of the night, but also his worst floor general game of the night with 7 turnovers. Sam Hoiberg shouldn't be expected to be our leading scorer and has kind of fallen out of the rotation a little bit. Haven't seen any Ramel Lloyd Jr., who was potentially expected to play a role. Then you look at the wing. Like, okay, Nebraska has 2 legit Division I wings. Bryce Williams for scoring, Juwan Gary for defense. But Nebraska doesn't, run in transition. It doesn't slow it down. It doesn't, put up 85 points per game consistently. It doesn't shoot the 3 perfectly. It doesn't finish at the rim at an elite level. And it also doesn't defend the same way last year's team did, I don't think. So Nebraska is still lacking an identity. And I think that's tough. We talk about that with football all the time. But I think for Nebraska to take that next step, it either had to, lean further into that defensive identity, and it had to start there. But I don't think this is an elite defensive team, or it had to go the other way, get better on offense, right? Avoid some of those long cold spells like you've had against Creighton, like you had against Minnesota in the first 5-8 minutes of the second half here. I just can't point to anything that Nebraska does exceptionally well or consistently better than opponents. And that's going to make it tough on a night-to-night basis if you don't know what it is this team can hang its hat on.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. And it's interesting too. I mean, you mentioned some of the playing time that we see throughout the night. Obviously, maybe that could be something down the line, or maybe if you don't have an identity, you maybe need to narrow it down. I mean, I'm just quite frankly interested in what Boogie Coleman's role is going to be, because he can do this where he has really nothing on the stat sheet. There's other games where he can, put together some good assists, look like a primary ball handler. I mean, he has not pushed himself to the level he was at previous colleges at Nebraska. And I think it's because it's not his role. And so I'm just kind of interested in obviously Eli Rice, a young guy, a lot of athleticism, maybe not quite contained quite yet. But I think that there is, I don't know, is there such a thing as too much depth in trying to find those roles early in the season that's maybe why they aren't finding an identity?
No, I think you're onto something there. I think you would rather be too deep than not deep enough. You'd rather have, a plethora of option and, a good problem to have. Strick and I talked about this a little bit on the block. I'm sure we'll get into it tomorrow and when Strick gets back next week as well. But the rotation that we thought Nebraska was going to stick with was that starting group of Williams, Lawrence, Tominaga, Mast, Alec. You're fine with that. That's a solid Big Ten starting lineup. Minutes for CJ Wilcher. Juwan Gary's the first guy off the bench. And then sprinkle in some Sam Hoiberg and Jerron Coleman as necessary. Maybe Blaise Keita if he ever comes back from the injury that's plaguing him. But I was of the mind Nebraska wouldn't necessarily need Blaze Cada except in case of emergency. So that's 10 guys if you include Cada, 9 bodies in that rotation that are going to get semi-consistent minutes. But really, if you combine the Hoiberg and Coleman minutes, you're down to an 8-man rotation, which is pretty solid. That's really where you want to be. Essentially, again, have 9 guys playing 8 guys worth of minutes. And that's okay. That's acceptable. It gives you options. It gives you ways to mix and match on any given night. But we haven't seen Nebraska do that mixing and matching necessarily against opponents. They haven't found either a weakness of the opponent to exploit or a strength of their own that they can go to time and time again. So I like an 8 to 9 man rotation because it gives you options depending on who's hot and what you need to do to counter the opponent. But at the same time, you would think Nebraska would have that role distribution, that knowledge of what the roles is kind of figured out by now, but Nebraska is still learning as it's going. And I don't think that's a transfer portal thing. I don't know if it's a coaching thing. And every team will struggle to adjust to this to some degree. But the fact that Nebraska has so many guys that can do so many things, there's not, again, a clearly defined, this is our go-to scorer. This is our go-to ball handler. This is, our big man rotation 100% for sure. The versatility I love. I'm a sucker for it. I love me some positionless basketball, like what the Warriors did with their, lineup of death back in their first couple runs. What your Boston Celtics are able to do now with a lot of wings. But there's a point where that's helpful and that's useful and it can play a role. But sometimes it's better to simplify, just have a true 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, because then guys get out of their own heads. They're not wondering whose turn it is to make a play.
He's Austin Overman. He is, you can catch him on the block with Eric Strickland tomorrow. Is Strick back tomorrow?
Stricky should be remote. I still have to touch base with him, but he is planning on being remote. If not, it's the Austin and Nick show again.
Yeah, well, I'm interested to hear from Strick too, because I know he gets upset during games like this. If you ever watched a game, this second half.
I finally watched a game with Strick on Sunday. Watched Creighton sitting right next to him. I've never seen that side of Eric Strickland before.
He can get upset. So I'm interested to hear what he has to say. Of course, I'll be with the captain tomorrow morning from 10 to 12, and we'll be back here on the Hoops Postgame show after the Michigan State game, which tips off 5:30 on Sunday. That'll wrap it up for us tonight. Thanks for joining us. We will be back on 93.7 The Ticket tomorrow morning. Early break.
Action Plumbing, Heating, Air, and Electric brings exciting career opportunities for you or someone you know. They are now hiring plumbers, electricians, and HVAC techs and installers to continually build their professional team. They offer competitive pay and full benefits packages that include health, dental, vision, PTO, and 401k options. Action has created a positive team environment for over 50 years. Apply online at actionlincoln.com.